I was talking to Anthony about the time of our presentation being the absolute last, and I was reflecting on that and wondering whether that's a reflection of the presentation I delivered last year in the bigger room with the bigger audience and they're shuffling me down, or whether they're saving the best to last. So if I end up on the lawn next year presenting, we'll understand probably where I'm sitting in the scheme of things. So our presentation, it's a dual presentation. I'll set it up and Anthony will knock it out of the park. So this is just talking about the innovative bulk household waste solutions for the City of Parramatta. The overview that I'll talk about is the background in bulk household service of Parramatta and traditionally or historically what it had been. Talk about the audit that Cleanaway conducted with our Resource Recovery Officer, his full-time dedicated officer for the City of Parramatta, and then I'll hand it over to Anthony to talk about the recommendations and the solutions and the conclusion. So just a bit of background on City of Parramatta and their bulk household services, or clean-up, or there's plenty of names for it, but we certainly call it clean-up at Cleanaway. Historically, they'd gone with 4 scheduled clean-ups across 12 separate zones, rolling every 12 weeks, so each resident, or each zone, if you like, was able to put it out every 12 weeks. A lot of residents set their clock and their calendars by this, and they know, and so do the wider community, even outside the LGA. So, you know, I did a presentation last year about this, and that being a bit of a beacon for illegal dumping. It's only offered to domestic service, and they get 1 cubic metre they're able to present out on the curbside. In 2016, credit to Anthony and his team, they put forward and agreed to a trial of a hybrid model, so moving away from that 4 scheduled to a hybrid model of 2 still scheduled and 2 pre-booked, and that was really a precursor and prep to transition the community to going to fully pre-booked. So the audits were undertaken in 2016 to really evaluate what the difference that had made compared to, we'd done a previous audit in 2013, just to compare those audits against each other, see if there was making any difference. I put this slide up last year, but that's just to remind Anthony what it used to look like with scheduled. Disaster. And that's just an insight into the explosion in tonnages that we found really from 2014 through to 2015. So as a collector, I'm sure everybody in the room could understand that a growth of over 30% in tonnages, that's pretty tough to handle in 1 year. And so you can imagine the flow-on effect to that in terms of service and quality and street amenity and product that's being put out. So hence when we made the change, we want to do an audit. So obviously the curbside audits are extremely important, not only for council but also for the collector to understand what is out there and what's being put out. So it's important for us to have a look at the data, look at the trends in materials from 2013 to 2016, see if there's been any changes and what is that. To look at the potential for source separation and recycle reuse capability, compare performance levels between areas, so in the zones having a look at the different demographics and population to see if, you know, one section of the community is putting out more or different types of waste, and then look at informed alternative education strategies for those zones or in those, and that's in conjunction with Anthony's got his own education team, and we've got our full education resource dedicated there as well, along with our Resource Recovery Officer. So a bit about the specifications. We did a visual audit across 4 weeks, and we'd go out in the first 3 days across those zones and complete the audit. We looked at the total volume and materials were categorised into 8 separate categories in things that were easily identifiable. We did 200 audits across the 4 zones, as I said. 165 of those audits were in suds and 35 were in muds. And the composition overview was, we looked at 234 cubic metres of material, was audited in total. We looked at the most significant identifiable stream, so something that's easy to put into a stream. We looked at the composition and volume, and it did vary. Significantly higher volumes in muds, particularly in the dense zones. The garden organics throughout that period in November was actually low compared to the historical garden organics, but we were coming off a fairly extended dry period through that part of last year. And the e-waste, which should not surprise anybody in this room, absolutely exploded from 2013 to 2016 and in fact went tenfold. So that's really a precursor into the future of what it's going to look like in that space. So I'm sure the industry is certainly having a look at that, about how that is. moving on. The difference between the suds and the muds, so just a quick insight into that. We looked at a high volume in the suds, so 60% of the material we were auditing were in the suds. It was about 0.8 cubic metres per dwelling on average. The other and furniture made up almost half of the items presented to the curb. In the other section are things such as recyclables, cardboard, paper, glass containers, or non-recyclables, things such as soft toys, polystyrene, bric-a-brac, crockery, that sort of stuff that the residents put out. And the garden organics and materials, metals, had similar proportion. Across in the muds, we did a lower volume of audits, but still 102 cubic metres. It was about 2.91 cubic metres per building on average, and about half a cubic metre per dwelling, which was surprising because actually internally we thought that muds actually put a whole heap more out there, to be honest. So to actually see that it's less than a sud was a good surprise. The furniture presented is most common in those sections, and other, again, frequently included stuff like, such as the polystyrene and cardboard, as I said. And again, e-waste coming out of the muds, in particular, the really big TVs and computers that you can get these days, so hence why it's making up, I suppose, exploding in the volume there. So handing over to you, Anthony. Yep. You're going to do it from down there? Yep.
Oh. Thanks, Michael. So, considerations. We've got some really good data there, working with our collection contractor, and thankfully has the capability to do the audit potential for us. That really gives us an insight into how we then can move forward and manage the maximum reuse and recycle of these goods, and also give the operator an understanding too, because they're out there every day dealing with collections. So some of the things we had to consider. What are the lessons learnt from the trial hybrid model in transitioning to a pre-book system? Providing the evidence to convince the elected representatives or administration in our case now to move to that model. The amalgamation certainly affected us in a unique way. For Parramatta, it was really just a massive boundary change on 5 different fronts. So we now have to harmonise 5 different council services into one, and that's across all the bins, the curbside bulky cleanup and other services we offer. Hopefully that will be harmonised by November with the commencement of a new collection contract. In the meantime, there is a lot of work to do. Impact on littering, illegal dumping. We've had a number of discussions today in other forums around that and the impact of curbside cleanup, particularly on our regulatory services and our cleansing guys, who then have to respond to that and often take the cost of that to dispose of that illegally dumped material. As I mentioned, there's a transition that we have to consider to a fully booked system, if that's the way we want to move, and I'll give some evidence later about how we benchmark that with other councils around us in Sydney. Certainly we wanted to look at problem waste, and we've had some great presentations by Matt and Daniel earlier around working with them to address that and coming to the residents to make it more convenient and flexible. We wanted to talk about reuse and rehoming opportunities and maximise that, and there'll be a number of here today that will be familiar with what I'll talk about shortly and what those opportunities will be. And the last thing is, if you've done all you can to exhaust that reuse and opportunity and recycle, then what are you going to do with the receipt and processing? Is there an opportunity then to actually take it somewhere where they can extract even more material from that? And I'll talk about a collaborative process that we've done. So that goes. So changes to the collection system. As Michael mentioned, we've had some mixed feelings with how this is actually run. Unfortunately, there has been some confusion moving from a 12-week period to a separate 12-week period in terms of which period we're in. If someone does make a booking and puts a clear sticker on the pile, the neighbours think it's their turn, the whole street starts putting it out, becomes a bit of a nightmare for follow-up with our regulatory and cleansing guys, and also administratively. It got to a point where we're actually just letting the resident, we'll book them in, just so it didn't mean that we had to then follow up and get them to get it off the street and back on the street at a later date. So there has been some lessons in that, and certainly they contributed to our decision in moving forward. Residents are obviously provided with a flexibility of service. If you move to a new collection system, it obviously needs to look at delays and complaints being significantly reduced. Certainly the book cleanups that we experienced did have reductions in illegal dumping. There was flexibility for people to take advantage of the service. And even during the scheduled periods, we actually had every fortnight the availability on a Monday to have limited bookings as well to keep the consistency going, so they didn't have to wait a large turnaround period. And certainly, as I said, there needed to be an evidence base if we wanted to move forward. As Michael said, significant differences in 2016 to 13 in terms of the tonnages, and most of you probably experience seasonal differences like we do. Usually a lot quieter during the winter months in terms of presentation, but certainly during the summer months much larger volumes, and that has implications for our contractor in terms of resourcing that and being able to meet that demand without having adverse complaints by the community, and certainly with the volumes making sure it gets picked up in the dedicated time. The blue line there, which is the 2016, shows that in those winter months significantly lower than usual, and that was because we'd actually had a pre-book period for the first time. We were only getting around 50 bookings a day, sometimes less, so it was that transition of people not understanding the process and getting used to a new booking system which they previously hadn't had. And you can see the big spike in the blue line are October, November and December. They realised that now it was their clean-up period, the 12 zones are out, and they just went mad, just decided all was saved up and let's put it out in that period, which has certainly significant implications for our collection contractor. So we then needed evidence to actually say how are we going to move to a new system that can improve what we can maximise in terms of reuse and recovery. 9 out of 13 or 70% of our neighbouring councils in Western Sydney have a pre-book system already. Certainly the number of missed services and legal dumping that are associated with just everyone putting it out at once can certainly be minimised. If you have a pre-book system with a list of properties they go to in a day, there's a lesser chance for those things to be missed. Poor public amenity. We got some really bad press in those really busy times that I showed you previously around the summer months where the trucks were just working 5-6 days a week and then overflowing to the next week. People were getting annoyed that it had been out then over a week. People were going through it and sprawling it onto footpaths and roads. We were getting reports of people coming from out of the area and adding to piles. It just became a bit untenable and we were getting bad press, and certainly politically it wasn't a good look. So that was something that really we had to use in our favour to move to a different system. And then we did a comprehensive waste services, future services survey last year, and 89% of those who had used a pre-booked system actually said they were very satisfied or satisfied with the service. So those who had used it, particularly those in the former Hills and Auburn areas, which and those in the Parramatta that had utilised it, were very satisfied. Some of the findings of the survey, which had over 2,000 respondents, so really good response, told us a little bit about not just clean up but all of our services, and as you can see there, words like easy, convenient, flexible, reliable, keeping the streets clean were all reasons why they wanted to move or saw the best things about a pre-book clean-up. Some of the dislikes, and this is obviously expected because it was quite a new thing for the former Parramatta area. Difficult to use, not sure about how to book in, need more information about it. So these are the sorts of things we can work on because it was only new, and obviously it means that we need a better communications in terms of getting that information out there, and that will come with time. I won't dwell on this, but certainly there was an element of problem waste or hazardous waste in our piles that we looked at through the audit, and that was realised a number of years ago, and as Daniel and Matt have recently said, we work with them collaborative to look at that problem waste issue. And I'll only point out that we're looking at new opportunities around e-waste particularly. So should we actually have the service expanded to have a book-in, so every week or second week we have a dedicated day just to e-waste. Maybe we should look at expanded polystyrene or cardboard, which was a problem in that other category that Michael spoke about. And clothing and textiles is another area that we thought then could be also used, and some sort of social enterprise could benefit out of that. So watch this space for those categories and pilot it in future. Reuse, repair and rehoming. So certainly we are promoting charitable and community recycle enterprises. A number of those are working with Parramatta and probably a number of you, and some of them are here at this forum demonstrating their good work. We've been with the BOW for a number of years now, and certainly we've moved from only around 40 bookings in the first year to over 150 now, gathering about 8 tonnes in the 3 quarters to date this financial year, so getting some really good numbers now. They've established a shop in Parramatta, which is in addition to their original Marrickville one. We've certainly supported them financially to get them back on their feet and be established in the area. They're also conducting a number of reuse and repair workshops on a monthly basis, which again helps people understand to address particularly those bigger items like furniture, which we found in the audit was an issue right across the spectrum of those cleanups that we looked at. Certainly we're also working with men's sheds, so some of you may have men's sheds in your local area, retired guys that have the skills, and in Granville and Parramatta we've been working with them to collect timber from the cleanups, and they're building furniture like potting benches and seating benches for local schools, nest boxes to go be retrofitted into some of our bushland areas for birds and small possums. So taking that opportunity to work with people in those sort of enterprises where we can and getting the benefit as well. A number of you are also part of the fridge buyback scheme, and for example we're looking at 1,800 fridges I think last year that were collected as part of that would otherwise potentially been on the curb as part of a clean-up. And obviously garage sale is another example, and I know a number of you also have car boot sales or promote other aspects of garage sales or boot sales as an important part. We also have a number of waste education events. At the moment we have e-waste collection days where people can drop off material, which typically results in 30 or 40 tonne of e-waste in those events. But obviously based on our audits that's not enough. With the increasing obsolescence in our society around e-waste, people are turning the products over quicker, and we now need to look at a better way to get that material out of our curbside cleanup. If we're going to ban e-waste like a number of councils have, then we have to provide some sort of avenue for them to do that and to look at what other interventions can be best served. We've done things like Love Where You Live, which is a 6-week program across several teams internally, working with our rangers and place managers and educators, looking at things like illegal dumping, littering and community pride in these hotspot areas. And that also not only is the compliance and education over 6 weeks, but it has a number of fun days or community days on weekends where families can come along. They can look at the equipment from our contractors or our local cleansing guys, understand what sort of items are being dumped and the implication of that. And so they've been working really well, and historically have at least 2 of those a year in those problem areas. We also have service requests that are mapped, and those maps of service requests then are transferred geographically with our GIS system to produce heat maps. Those heat maps show us where the density of requests are coming in, and then we can obviously from that focus on those particular areas. Obviously you get hunches about where these problem areas are, but we've now got some hard data from our service requests on where the problem areas are, and we can map through time whether these areas are becoming less of an issue. A couple more slides. We talked about receipt and processing. We were lucky enough to work with the former Bankstown, Liverpool and also Fairfield councils to look at a collaborative tender around receipt and processing of our bulky curbside cleanup. It was convenient for us to all together look at the economies of scale and benefits from that, and led by Bankstown it resulted in at least 2 of us going with Dialer Dump Industries at Genesis there at Eastern Creek, where they guarantee a minimum 50% recovery of our material that goes through the truck. And so for Parramatta that was over 7,500 tonnes last financial year, of which half of that is recovered through the facility there at Genesis at Dialer Dump. So it comes down to a point of, do you segregate the the material at curb? A number of councils segregate and book their metals separately. They might chip and book their green waste separately, or have other enterprises collect mattresses at the curb or have them dropped off to a facility. Or do you put it all in a truck and take it to a facility that can then separate it at the other end? Obviously there's things like quality that may be sacrificed, but there's also the cost that you need to consider in how you can maximise that reuse and benefit. So conclusions, certainly the partnership between ourselves and Cleanaway as our collection contractor and auditor has enabled us to have some really good information, some data on which to make continuous improvement. We have a specialised resource recovery officer who looks at bulky curbside waste and also contamination in our bins. That's been pretty important in terms of resulting in and having them critical to this audit process. The pilot hybrid system has certainly gave us some good information in terms of how we want to and where we're going to move with the new contract, and that evidence that I showed you has resulted in us now moving to a fully booked system from November this year. The waste avoidance, reuse and rehoming should be the highest priority in terms of local government focus, and if you can get that right across those avenues I've demonstrated here, and I know a number of you are using those, it really then is about, well, what can be left done, and education and awareness and enforcement also all play a vital role in then saying how do we actually get and measure those outcomes to maximise our benefit. And certainly the last resort is, well, what do we do with it once it goes into the truck and we realise that it's going to be either landfilled or tipped? The option is to look at a tender where you can maximise reuse even further and have some benefit out of that, and that all adds to your diversion from landfill and results in great outcomes. Thank you.